now. You are correct. Yep.
Excellent, excellent. Carry on.
Okay, so the other part, just give an update of who Agricovery is, just so you feel a bit more confident around there. Agricovery's been around for 15 years. We currently run 2 product stewardship schemes around agrochemical containers and unwanted residual agrochemicals. We're a not-for-profit foundation funded by over 80 brands. And our governance is undertaken through a board, which are 7 representatives who are from different parts of the rural sector, like Federated Farmers, Hort New Zealand, and the likes of that. As a foundation, our vision is to be the primary sector product stewardship scheme. We collect all the on-farm inorganic waste. One of our strengths is in developing the new recycling streams, and we have several new streams underway. So whilst we're talking about the household weeds and pests at the moment, we have several others that we're working on as well. So we really are trying to grow this area and do the right thing. And we do have a website under agricovery.org.nz or .co.nz, which has a bit of a history there of who we are and stuff. You also have my email address if you want to, or my phone number to give me a call at some stage if you want to discuss anything about Agricovery. But not to take up too much time, I'll pass you over to Fraser.
Excellent. Thank you,
Excuse me. Fraser, sorry, before you do it.
Sure.
There's just someone else just trying to get into the meeting.
Right, that's on you. Tony, can you see if we can invite someone else in?
Yep.
Yep, there we go. Oh, couple. Excellent. Welcome to the new folks here. We're just getting started. I'm about to start the presentation. Tony's just given a welcome. And just a heads up, we are recording this session just for the purposes of making it available to others. The presentation that I'm going to go through and the various bits, the guidelines and the act that I talk about, we'll be putting all of this up with the recording on the Agricovery website very shortly, so that any others that aren't present can watch this presentation, as well as you can work through the notes that I will talk to and look up some of the information that I refer to give you a bit more detail. But in the interim, I will just endeavour here to share my screen so that you can see what I'm talking to, and hopefully this will work. So if all has gone well, you can see a slide showing a mountain and some words. Is that working for everyone?
Yep.
Excellent, excellent. So I'll get started. Firstly, welcome to all of you, and thank you for responding and you participating in this webinar, which is really allowing us to give a bit of a briefing as we kick off a process of working towards product stewardship in this space. And so what I'm going to work through is just give a bit of the context of why we're doing this, what we're planning to do, what we're going to need, what timeframes will look like, and just for those who aren't familiar with product stewardship and how it works, give a bit of a sense of the direction that we're going in. So the thing I need to say by way of introduction, first off, and this is really important, it's also mentioned specifically in the reference documents that have come from the government about product stewardship, is it does, of course, involve competing companies coming together and cooperating, which under the Commerce Act is seen as a slightly dangerous thing to do. So please just, as you ask questions, this is largely a one-way process, but we will have a Q&A session. Please don't discuss anything that would be commercially sensitive, pricing, market share, anything like that. I think it's probably fairly unlikely what we're discussing today, but just to be aware that we need to be careful as we come together, and let's all collaborate in an appropriate way. I'm sure you've probably seen these statements before, but we do take it very seriously, and we don't want to have the process go awry or anyone get in trouble. So with that being said, I'll kick into providing a bit of a starting point for why we need to even be looking at this. And the guiding piece of legislation that we will be providing a link to on Agricovery's website is the Waste Minimisation Act 2008. Now, obviously, this has been around for 13 years, and within the Waste Minimisation Act is the ability for the Environment Minister to declare certain product categories as priority products if they pose the risk of significant environmental harm and could be well managed under a product stewardship scheme. The Act was out for 12 years before the government looked at doing that, but signalled in 2019 that they were looking at a range of products to declare as priority products, and initiated a consultation process in 2019, and then confirmed last year a range of priority products, including agrochemicals and their containers. Now, how they've chosen to define agrochemicals and their containers is quite broad, arguably too broad, and we're going to need to work with this, but the relevant bits to be aware of is that it is everything in a container up to and including 1,000 litres. So when it comes to the space that we're talking about today, that's going to capture pretty much everything one would imagine in terms of container sizes. And then, there's various types of agrochemicals listed. The first one is really where Agricovery has traditionally lived, horticultural, agricultural agrochemicals, but you'll see the bolder point there, household pest and weed control operations, chemicals used therein. Now, that raises a whole bunch of questions as to what that definition includes. And the short answer is we don't know. That is the entirety of the definition. There are no supporting words. So we are going to need to do some work potentially on further defining that and getting a sense of what may be in and out of scope. But you will note that the ACDM is a bit of a guide, but that the definition includes both products that are registered in that way and those that are not. So it's quite broad is the starting point, and that's why we're beginning this process to start looking pretty closely at it. What the declaration that took place in July of last year means is that the government then has the ability under the Waste Minimisation Act to require that products that fall within that definition are not sold other than in accordance with a product stewardship, an accredited product stewardship scheme for that product type. So in short, what the indication from the Ministry for the Environment is that once this is in place, anyone that endeavours to sell in this case, a household pest or weed control product outside of the scheme would be liable for a fine of $100,000. That's the current indication in terms of compliance. So it's pretty serious business. It takes product stewardship, and by that term we simply mean in shorthand the producers taking responsibility for the waste from a product. It takes that from being what is currently a voluntary activity to becoming a regulated activity that is fundamentally controlled by government. And so their intention is to require everyone to participate rather than it being a voluntary activity, and to penalise pretty severely those who do not align with the product stewardship scheme for that product category. Along with the product declaration, government has also gazetted guidelines for a scheme, which I'll go through, which essentially dictate how a scheme has to operate, what its sort of design criteria are, how it has to be run, what it needs to do. Again, these are reasonably broad, but they provide us a pretty good picture of what we need to do to meet government requirements. And if there is some aspect of those guidelines that we just cannot practically meet, there is the ability to deviate, but it's a bit of a process. So we would be moving forward as far as possible in alignment with the guidelines and to create something that follows the guidelines pretty closely. So the guidelines, again, based on some pretty extensive industry consultation, The draft guidelines came out in the middle of 2019. In my view, and I have a legal background, they weren't great. They would have been quite difficult to comply with, but as a result of consultation, they were refined, and I would have to say they're pretty good. They're pretty reasonable. There's nothing in there that I think is unduly onerous, but they are designed to ensure that actual product stewardship takes place. The guidelines don't really allow commercial operators to kind of contract out or to step outside of that responsibility and pass to consumers. It really has to be done properly, and that's not inappropriate. The guidelines focus a lot on governance and transparency, and the need to make the whole process very open and accessible to consumers, so that they can see what's being paid, what that money has been used for, knowing that it's independently audited, all those sorts of things to keep the process above board. And I think that's probably good for integrity and the credibility of the industry. So there's no sort of inherent problems in there making something work. The reason that Agricovery, as Tony has noted, the reason that Agricovery is stepping into the space is that it is a natural alignment with what it already does. That the sort of products that are in use in a household or domestic context are some of the same products that Agricovery is working with in a commercial context. So its board, which is representative of particularly the rural waste sector, but also brand owners through the likes of AgCom and those sorts of organisations, is in a pretty good position to be able to extend its service delivery into the space. That means sharing some of the overhead load, keeping the development costs a bit lower, and so it's quite fortunate that there, in my view, that there is an organisation there that can step up into the space, because starting from scratch is quite tricky. The guidelines split into two different elements. And the first of these are the effects. This is the word that comes with the guidelines. It's kind of like some of the key design criteria. The first of these is an emphasis on product stewardship, circular resource use. What that means, we're all talking about circular economy, is building into that space, and it means doing the best one possibly can with the waste products and packaging as high up the waste hierarchy as possible. So recycling is better than disposal, but designing out the waste, avoiding the waste in the first place, is better than recycling. So part of what the product stewardship scheme needs to do is to promote better packaging decisions and to look for ways to reduce packaging and all that sort of thing, with commercial reality built in, but looking for opportunities to encourage brand owners to do better in that space. Of key interest, and I'll unpack this a little bit in the next slide, but is that the entire costs of managing the scheme, of collecting, processing, disposing of waste, the design and the intention is that is covered by product or producer fees. And in reality, what that means is a levy on the product. This is how Agricovery already operates. There's a levy on products sold. Because this is regulated, it means that all brands have to participate, so it doesn't create a competitive imbalance. The idea is that those costs, rather than being paid specifically by the user, are just spread across all the products. Albeit that the indication from government here is that the levies should reflect the costs of disposal. So products that are difficult to dispose of, either by virtue of their packaging or the residual chemicals that are more expensive to dispose of, should attract a higher levy. So that's kind of built into it. The design outcomes sought from the way that the fees are structured is that the end user is able to access a free and convenient collection, not a user pays collection. And then finally, and this may or may not be tricky, it is a bit tricky in the rural waste space, but the product stewardship scheme has to cover not just the current products in the market, but legacy and orphaned products. Again, I'm not sure that that's a major issue in the space that we're talking about, but as you can imagine, with the likes of old DDT and things in farm sheds, this can be quite expensive, so that needs to be considered in the design of the scheme. Beyond the costs and those aspects of the structure, I already mentioned transparency, public accountability, annual reports. Everything needs to be open and available for people to peruse and understand. And one of the other design aspects is collaboration, that as far as possible, new product stewardship schemes are aligning with and sharing resources and infrastructure with existing product stewardship schemes. Again, given that Agricovery is stepping into the space, that's kind of built in from day one. I've sort of covered this, I think, drilling down on the end of life costs. This is really where probably a fair chunk of the discussion will end up being had in terms of this scheme, is how you structure the levies, how you provide a collection that is reasonable and accessible but not onerously expensive. That's a little bit tricky, so we'll need to spend some time on that. And also getting some sense as to what, if any, legacy and orphan priority products there may be out there that we need to be cognizant of. So that's the first part of the guidelines. The second part talks a little bit more about the structure and operations. So it is intended that a product stewardship scheme is run by a non-profit, and there's all kinds of requirements as to how contracts are awarded, how directors are appointed, that the boards are representative, and again, we'll need to run through some processes there. Part of it will be looking at Agricovery's board and the industry and being confident that that represents the interest of the household pest and weed control sector. And it is also intended that there is a single scheme for the product type, for agrichemicals in this case. I think the prevailing view is that to fragment that is going to increase overall costs. So if we can keep it all under one umbrella, as we're intending to do, that makes good sense. And then finally, I've talked a little bit about the scheme operations, about that transparency and making sure that everything is above board and due process is followed. The targets then are around understanding what the baseline is, which involves understanding what's currently happening with products at end of life, what's happening with waste, but then setting some targets. It might be we want to recover 80% of the waste that's out there. It might be that we want to grow 20% a year, but setting some measurable performance targets and reviewing those regularly is also part of the guidelines. Now, we'll put a link on the Agricovery website after this. You can go and look at these guidelines, but to be honest, there's not a massive amount of detail beyond what you see here. I've abbreviated them all to one sentence, but some of them are much longer. But you can certainly have a look at those and understand kind of the boxes that the scheme needs to tick. So that is that is what we are designing to. In terms of the timeframes, this is a little bit tricky. There are 3 timeframes given for having a product stewardship scheme up and running for a priority product. The first is what applies to Agricovery for its core schemes, which is within a year. So that takes them to July of 2021. The remaining 2, which are for those that are not sort of currently covered by a product stewardship scheme, the wording is a little bit ambiguous for these. So it may be that one has to have a scheme up and running within 3 years, which would be July 2023, or it could be that one has to have a scheme up and running, and this is the bold section there, within 1 year of finishing this design process that we are just starting. And we think, based on our engagement with MFE so far, that that's what we're looking at, which means that we can really take as long as we need to take in the co-design process. But then once we complete it and we report to government, yes, we've completed this, then we have a year to get ready and enact that. Once we've pulled together an advisory group, we will check that and make sure that we've got the numbers right. But in all likelihood, whether it is the first or the second, we're probably going to be operating to similar time frames, as in 2 to 3 years to get everything up and running, and to begin to charge the levies and have the operation in place. So with that all in mind, essentially what Agricovery has done is initiated the process and recognised that household pest and weed control products are broadly within the product category that it is currently managing. And so it has allocated funding to begin the process. To essentially, we have a 2-year project plan. Agricovery has said that we'll cover the costs of the first year, which include my time in leading the process and bringing it together. But the intention is that at the end of that first year, that the industry will need to cover the costs of implementation and get it up to speed, which seems reasonable. In order to make sure that we understand the needs of the industry and that we have the right people contributing and we're consulting with, we are looking to pull together an industry advisory group quite quickly after this meeting. Part of what we'll need to do is make sure that we understand who should be on that advisory group. Given that the number of brand owners that we've identified that are operating in this space is quite small, that might be quite easy. It might be that we can have all of the brand owners around the table. That would be great if that's feasible, to provide input and to guide the process so that we come up with a scheme that is going to work really, really well. And then essentially we get on with the process of developing a scheme and making sure it is actually feasible to do a scheme for these kinds of products. It's really important to note that the time that I have available and funded to work on this is reasonably limited. So this will be a bit of a process of everyone chipping in and helping. I certainly can't do it all myself. Even if I had the time, the kinds of experience, information, knowledge, expertise that you have in this particular industry sector is just absolutely critical to bring to the table and to assemble data and to understand what's currently happening. So we're all going to need to work together in a bit of a collaborative process to make this work and to develop a scheme that's going to meet government requirements. So the industry advisory group, just to drill down on that a little bit more, will probably over the next year want to meet monthly, I would suggest, probably every second one in person, depending on where everyone is based, and otherwise remotely, just to keep the conversation going and moving. I would ideally like to pull that group together in May had the first meeting in May to drill down on some of this stuff. And so would welcome, after this meeting's concluded, if you are willing to serve on that group, please do let me know, and you should all have my email. I'll share it if you don't. But that group will look to pull together information about the products that are out there, the volume, the packaging types, the chemical types, so that we can formulate a pretty good map of what we need to deal with, how we should categorize those products, how we should prioritize those, where they're being sold, who they're being sold by, how they're used, really pulling that information together so that we can deal with the waste from those products in an appropriate and a smart way and minimize the costs. Making sure that we are communicating with everyone that's impacted. That might be, again, it might be relatively easy given the number of brands in this space, and really just making sure that we develop a scheme that meets the guidelines as well as meeting the commercial reality of continuing to do business. The kind of broad outline of the project plan that we're operating to, as I noted, is in 2 years. The focus in year one is really to spend time to map out the industry, to know what the products are, what the waste streams are, what the peculiarities of these sort of products are, and again, who sells them, all of that sort of stuff. There's a fair bit of number crunching and data gathering that needs to go on, and then working through to understand the degree to which the products at the end of the life, to which they go to landfill, or whether there's any recycling and what goes on, and start to understand what the potential for recycling of any packaging or leftover materials is, or whether we're looking just to make sure that we carefully gather these things and just for safe disposal. We may look to do some trials if that makes sense, with retailers or with others, and really where we want to end up at the end of this first year is with a pretty good map of the industry, with a pretty good idea of what a product stewardship scheme should look like, what levies are likely, how we would charge those, how they might be scaled up and down depending on different products and packaging, and be ready to go with a pretty good plan for implementation. That's year one. Year two then really breaks down and focuses on the logistical details. So actually, beginning the process of contracting, if we need to collect things from places, figuring out exactly how things will be disposed of, recycled, and really launching and putting the scheme in place, running some pilots, and making sure that we've got everything done. Communications and PR and reporting and all of that sort of stuff needs to follow in that space as well. Now, as I said, I'm contracted to be involved in year one. Year two, then the mantle passes a little bit to the industry to say, look, whatever is going to be needed in year two will need to be funded by the brand owners. And it's worth me saying that Agricovery is committed in principle to moving forward into the space, but that will depend on us coming up with a scheme that is going to work, that is going to be feasible, that's broadly accepted, and that's going to align. So we need to make sure that we do that work and do it very, very well. Just taking a step back as to in considering some of the particular challenges that we are going to face in the space, and these are some of the issues that the advisory group will need to deal with, is we know that these are a range of user types, channels to market, retailers. We have a pretty broad definition of the product in terms of household waste and pest and weed control products. And one of you has already issued the inquiry to me, are fly sprays included? Well, we don't exactly know, but we think so. There's no fundamental reason why they wouldn't be. It is a household pest control product. I am wondering, as I looked at, on various websites at the different products. I mean, technically, a mousetrap is a household pest control product, but I think we could probably stick to products that one would broadly consider an agrochemical or a chemical at least. But we will, after we've met as a group, we will assemble some questions and points of clarification, and I will discuss those with the Ministry for the Environment and make sure that we are understanding it correctly. Given that this is an industry-wide and collaborative process, it is probably quite likely that the government will ask what we think, what the natural limitations are to the definition. They won't necessarily accept that, but that may be definitive if we describe what demarcates household pest and weed control products and what sits inside and outside. So that's something else we'll want to have a discussion on. We'll need to figure out, obviously, all the materials and all the products and what they're packaged in and what they are and how they should be handled. We'll need to figure out what's happening with the waste currently. Is it all just going to people's red bins at home? Is it being collected by councils at transfer stations? We'll need to do a bit of research on that, and again, make sure that we understand how the products need to be handled, and if there are safety or environmental concerns that need to be borne in mind. It's worth me saying as well that one should not read product stewardship as and conflate it with recycling. Recycling may not be the goal. This is about safe and appropriate waste management and minimisation. So to recycle things that may be hazardous at great cost or at great risk, that's not what we're trying to achieve. We're just making sure that we generate only the waste that we need to generate, and that we deal with the waste in the most appropriate manner. So there is a reasonableness to this that hopefully will allay any fears that everyone needs to make their fly spray cans easily recyclable. I don't think that's necessarily what we're looking at here at all. Another concern is as we progress with this project, and particularly in year 2, some brands may elect not to participate and say, we're not going to fund this, we're not going to do it, and some may decide they will. We'll need to think, how do you deal with that? If some invest in the creation of a scheme and others don't, and then want to jump on board later on, maybe there's an entry fee. I don't think that will be something to discuss to make sure that is fair on everyone, and probably that the share of costs that are paid is somewhat in balance with market share and those sorts of things, just to keep everything very fair. Who will pay the levies on products? It will likely be, it likely be the ACV register, but it may be that we need to declare that and build that into the scheme design. And then another big challenge that we'll need to work through is to decide what levies will look like. Now, previously, Agricovery, and in fact still, Agricovery has a flat levy on all agrichemicals sold. So I think it's 13 cents a litre, if memory serves. So when you sell a 10-litre container of a chemical, you pay $1.30. That goes to Agricovery, and then that covers the cost of receiving the container back and any leftover chemicals. The guidelines really require a little more granularity and fairness than that. And so as I worked with Agricovery over the last couple of years, I designed this structure in front of you and working very closely with the brands and the farmers. to identify a different way of breaking that down. So instead, what you have is a levy on the container that is weighted based on the cost of recycling the container, and then a levy for chemical disposal that's based on the hazardousness or the toxicity of the chemical. That way, it's more fair for, say, those that have a dairy detergent or something like that that is not particularly difficult to handle or dispose of, versus those that are presenting with more sort of toxic chemicals. It's pretty likely, as we wade into the household pest and weed control space, that we will need to do something similar. And again, part of the role of the advisory group will be to understand how all of this plays out. We've divided up on this this slide. We've divided up the chemicals into groups and classified them based on their on the nature of chemical. Perhaps we need to do the same. What's important is that there's fairness, that people with brands with different products feel that the levy they're paying really does reflect the real cost of disposing of the waste associated with that product. So the next steps, just as I draw this to a close, I'm very keen and eager to engage you all as brand owners in putting together the advisory group and making sure that we have the right representation on that. And then that advisory group will kind of shepherd in the process of categorising and prioritising the products, making sure that we've got the data on the different products that are out there and how many of them there are, what the packaging is made of, and what the chemicals are, and start to map all that out. Begin some research to understand what's currently happening with the waste, product trials, and if there are some brands that don't participate in the advisory group, making sure that we communicate both what we're doing to those brands, as well as welcoming in discussion and consultation to ensure that at the end we have a scheme design that is going to meet the needs of the industry as well as users, as well as the government guidelines. And that's really what we're moving towards, is to come up with something that improves environmental outcomes, meets government requirements, but also works really well for users, is an industry enhancer in the eyes of users, but is not just a big compliance exercise. It's something that does align well with the commercial reality of doing business and selling these products, and hopefully, ideally, actually solve some problems for the industry and gives greater credibility. I mean, we're looking for something that is a win for everybody involved. So that is really all I have to say. That's a great long monologue, and I appreciate your attention and patience. So really just want to, at this stage, turn it over for questions, anything that's not clear or that you want to know or ask. I'll turn this off and just give you the opportunity to ask anything, and if I know it, I'll answer it. If not, we'll find out what the answer is. But if I forget to say it later, we will put on the Agricovery website this recording, the presentation that you've just seen, plus links to the Waste Minimisation Act that I've mentioned, to the priority product declaration, and also to the guidelines, so that you can drill down on them. Once again, would very much like to hear from all of you, ideally, and in terms of an expression of willingness, I hope, to be involved in an advisory group and help us bring this home. So with that said, questions?
Fraser, it's David.
Hi.
Yeah. So you mentioned the interactions with Ministry of the Environment. What are the interactions with ACVM and EPA in this?
Sorry, what interactions?
Are you having, or will you have, expected to have ACV and EPA?
The EPA, if we need to have interactions with the EPA, we will, and I probably need to understand more of the context of what that discussion would be. With the ACVM, we haven't engaged with them specifically on household pest and weed control products, but we did connect with them, I'm going to say early last year, to look at what the opportunities were to sort of access data directly. Given that a lot of data is already given by brand owners, could we access that directly in a sort of sanitized way? And I understood in the meeting, not really. We can get a sense of what new products are registered or deregistered, but beyond that, privacy concerns probably limit us accessing any more data, and they would direct us back directly to the brand owners. Plus, it would be fair to say, if I'm not talking out of school, that the systems that under which the ACVM operate are not particularly conducive to data sharing. They're not easy to access. Should they be? They're not particularly easy to access and extract data from. But I would welcome a discussion on that in the advisory group as to any additional dialogue we need to have. I would simply take that guidance.
Yeah, I mean, EPA need to be in the thinking because they're the ones who are approving the weekends, not ACVM.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a line here. So it's like you have to line up with a few ministries. Good luck.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, we will engage with whoever we need to engage with, and that will be again one of the things that we discussed in the in the first meeting is who do we need to go and talk to make sure that we do this in the right way and make it as easy as possible.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from anyone? No. Well, certainly, if you do think of any other questions, I think you will have all received an email from me. If not, we'll put my email address up on the Agricovery website. It's just fraser@tnc.co.nz. Happy to answer any questions. And again, if you would consider participating in a meeting sometime in May, and I would encourage you all to do that. Please do let me know when, if you are able to, some dates that might work, and perhaps your location. I'm guessing probably Auckland is the most likely location, but if not, we can figure that out. And it would be very useful to really start to wrestle with this and get the process going. Okay. Okay. No other comments from anyone else. Otherwise, we'll draw it to a close, and I'll say a big thank you for your time, and encourage you to look at the documents and understand this a bit better. It's coming. we certainly need to grapple with it, and hopefully Agricovery and myself can support the industry in making this work in as disruptive, in as least disruptive way as possible. And again, I think there's a potential for this to really enhance the industry and be a really good story to consumers. So, Tony, do you have any other comments that you'd like to leave people with?
Thanks, Fraser, for everything you've done today, and just thanking everyone for participation today. And we really encourage you to work with us to come up with the best scheme we possibly can do.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everyone, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Fraser.
Excellent. Thanks, Fraser.
Thank you.